Welcome back to the Pulse Podcast, the show where we get real about what takes place in the world of healthcare with no filter and no fluff. If you're new here, I'm your host. Today's episode is a little different because instead of talking to someone who's already deep inside their career, we're talking to someone who's built her whole platform around helping people before they even get there. You probably know her as the Premed big sister. She's all over TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and honestly, the name says it all. She gives the kind of advice you would want from an older sibling who's already been through it and isn't afraid to just tell you the truth. Amber, welcome to the show. I'm honored you're here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
That's amazing. So, before we dive in, for anyone who hasn't found you yet, give us a quick version or vision of who you are and what you do, and what made you want to start putting your outreach or your content in social media in the first place.
So I'm Amber. I'm a second year med student, and I wanted to start making content for everybody who was kind of coming after me because I was really involved in MAPS. So a branch, the undergrad branch of SNMA, which is the Student National Medical Association. I was basically guiding the younger people as I was actively going through the process of applying and everything that came before that. But especially as I was applying and after I got in during my senior year, I started mentoring the people behind me very heavily. And I realized just how much misinformation was out there and how difficult it can be to find out some of the information. And I was like, this is really confusing and really expensive. So, how can I make this easier for people to understand? And that's what inspired me to start the page.
And I love that. So let's get into it because I know exactly who's listening to this right now, and I want this episode to actually be useful and specific to them. So I want to start all the way back because a lot of people listening are still in high school. They're still trying to figure out what this path even is. So let's start there. If a high schooler wants to explore medicine before college, what should they actually be doing right now?
So I would recommend that if you want to explore medicine, first off, there are so many branches within medicine, and I'm still learning about careers within medicine today. I would understand and do some research because becoming a physician is not the only career within medicine, and it's not going to be the career for everybody for a lot of different reasons. But I would say explore all the career options, and like you can do that research online, looking up what are careers in healthcare. So first, I would look at that and explore, physician assistant, nursing, even the difference between DO and MD. So first, I would look at all of those and see what kind of pulls your eye there. But then if you're still on the path of becoming a physician and that's what you want, then I would recommend trying to shadow. And a lot of people say that they don't know anyone. So I feel like a great first step could just be when you have your doctor's appointment, asking your doctor if you could shadow them.
And that's an amazing place to start off. But let's go back to the beginning on what you were talking about. You were saying that med school isn't the only place to go. I actually have an experience from this because one of my friends, she wanted to go to pre-med and major in neuroscience and go into neurology. But then she discovered she actually likes talking to people and less on the research-based side. So she instead diverted into more psychological and more therapeutic ways into her medicine journey. So when you talk about shadowing in those specific areas, what extracurriculars genuinely matter in high school for some pre-med curiosities versus for what's just background noise and what they don't really need to do, even though a lot of people tell them that this is important.
I feel like you can volunteer as much as you can. So at some places, if you're in high school, obviously you're going to be a little bit limited just because of your age. But if you can volunteer at some local health fairs and you wouldn't necessarily be doing anything, but you would be in that environment with those people, and that would get you an opportunity to talk to them, possibly connect with some physicians so you could shadow them and to just kind of see how they interact with patients to understand that a little bit more and see their impact. And then also just volunteering in general outside of medicine, because at that age, like medicine is a career where everything is about delayed gratification. And so a lot of people try to jump the gun and like try to get as close to getting to act out being like a doctor as soon as possible. when in reality, to get in, it's way more about book work and traditional like didactic lecture learning. And even your first 2 years of med school, you're mostly doing still that traditional lecture learning. So I would make sure for your application that you're volunteering and that you're getting hours doing things you're passionate about, because that will help you when you're in college, right? When you have less time. And so that'll help you more for your application.
So, when you're talking about volunteering or shadowing, what's a realistic way to actually test if you like medicine before committing to years of medicine ahead?
I think a good way to test it is by one, doing your research, and then two, the shadowing. And I would try to shadow in a few different fields if you can. And also know that is if you can't get any shadowing experiences in specific fields or fields you want to see, know that you can stay the course and you'll get more opportunities in college. It can be a little harder when you're younger because people might see you as a liability in the hospital. And so, if you can't get any opportunities as a high schooler, I wouldn't be discouraged. And this would be more for people that want to be in the operating room. That's where it might be a little bit more challenging, but it's possible. It just depends on how willing you are to put yourself out there.
So, like you said, that you need to do a lot of research before you actually get into medicine, especially in high school. What do you wish someone had told you about the entirety of the pre-med track or pathway back when you were actually in high school?
I wish somebody would have stressed to me the importance of really building your foundation of knowledge in a way where you're going to remember things long term. But once you get to arguably one of the biggest barriers, which is the MCAT, you're going to realize just how important it is that you remember as much as possible, especially about the basics, because you can use that information sometimes to figure out the answer, even when you're not exactly sure. So you really need to get good at learning how to learn, learning how you study, and making sure that you're integrating methods that are proven by science that are going to work for you.
Okay, and that's really helpful because I think a lot of people are just trying to default to whatever looks good on paper instead of actually studying. Because I know a lot of people, and I'm a victim myself, I try to go out for the best opportunities. Like, for example, this summer, I'm in a lot of research fellowships and I'm backtracking on my SAT work or just AP classwork. So let's talk about the actual grind now and the studying. What's an actual system a student can use or could start using this week that is proven scientifically and that's usually helpful for everyone?
Yeah. Okay. So the main system that I would go with is something where you're one, first of all, previewing your notes before class. Now, I'm trying to remember back to high school. I don't know if we had our notes before class. So if you don't have that, that's fine. But knowing, being prepared for what you're about to learn in class, already being set up so you're not just like clocking in when the lecture starts, that's always really helpful so that your brain is prepped to know what's going to be important. And then after the lecture, well, after you get home, because this is high school, right? So then after you get home for that day, make sure you review what you learned that day in class. And then this is where the important part comes in, is the active recall. So this is where you need to use some flashcards of some sort. So you could either make them by hand or you could use something. There's a tool that I like that's called Jungle, and it's good for people at all stages. So you could like use that. It can make the flashcards for you if you put your notes in there. There's also Anki, but I don't think Anki is very like for high schoolers. I mean, it can be if you're in like AP courses, something that's college level, then some of the Anki decks might correlate. But for most classes, I would use like Jungle or a tool similar to that. So that way you can have those flashcards and you save time not having to make the flashcards yourself. And then the last part is the practice questions, which is another reason why I like Jungle, because it can make you practice questions. And I think you should also ask your professor for practice questions. Make sure you're not asking them if you haven't already done the ones they gave you, though,
Yeah.
if you haven't already mastered that. and then just do those because those will identify gaps in your knowledge. So it's really important that you do the active recall with the flashcards and then that you test your knowledge.
I know that you stress jungle a lot. I've seen it all throughout your content. You love jungle so much. So, including different websites like Jungle, Anki, Active Recall, Space Repetition, how would you explain these tools to someone who's never used them before?
This is kind of what I'm talking about when I'm saying backed by science. So the part that is backed by science is the spaced repetition. So there's this thing called the forgetting curve, and the forgetting curve says that after 24 hours after we learn something, we forget 50% of it. So this could be alarming, right? Because you're putting in hours like learning something and then you don't review it. Now you've lost 50%. Whereas if you review it and then you start doing the flashcards, now you can keep up that knowledge and you're not like wasting your time. So these are like active forms of studying. Passive studying would be like rewatching something, rereading something, rewriting notes. Those are things you don't want to do because the answers are already there. So you're tricking your brain into thinking that you know more than you do. And then when nothing's in front of you, now you don't know what to do.
And now I like based on what you just said, I kind of want to bring it back between grades and testing and extracurriculars and everything because personally, and I know I'm speaking out for a lot of high school students out there, it just gets more and more competitive every single year and it feels like you're not doing enough every single year. So how do you try and fix in everything without actually burning out? What helped you throughout the years?
I think this is where a 4-year plan comes in, and you can even have one for high school. But I guess if I always feel bad that the high schoolers feel behind, right? Because you guys are not behind. You guys are doing so much, and you guys are so amazing for even caring now and starting now. So that's already really awesome, and you definitely have a leg up. But if you are interested in getting even more of a leg up by doing things in high school, then I would say take my 4-year plan that I kind of talk about and I guess convert it into what year are you in high school?
I'm going to be a rising junior.
Okay. So like a 6-year plan where, part of this is going through college, but the first 5 years of that plan is about things that are going to happen before you apply if you want to go straight through. And so usually in the 4-year plan, I'm talking about how you map out when you're going to do your leadership positions and when you're going to do certain extracurricular activities, because you want to do it in a way where during times like for the MCAT, you have less going on. So you're less busy. And this is for your classes and your extracurricular activities, because you also want to have a light schedule during that time. I also wanted to have a light schedule for my last year of college. So I also planned that out, which meant I had to be aggressive about getting research and clinical like shadowing hours and my leadership and making sure that all that stuff was done on the front end. So I would say if you plan it out with intent, you won't be as stressed out because you'll learn how to say no. When you have your plan and okay, this is what I need to do, because you only have 15 activities on MCAS, right? So
Right.
you can't just collect. That's one mistake that it's really unfortunate for people, but they try to collect a bunch of things thinking that it's all stacking up and it's going to look amazing. And unless you are in Texas, you can't put every single thing you did. The Texas portal is the only one that does that. But for the rest of AMCAS, you only get 15 activities. So it's about longevity over just collecting random stuff. So when you know what you're doing, then when everyone's trying to get you to do stuff and offering you stuff, you can say no. And that allows you to protect your free time and your rest time and all your extra time because no, my spots are going to be filled by X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. So, especially when you know what's going to be filled up in your schedule, you need time to study for everything. And now taking your 4-year from 6-year plan, let's go back to 4-year plan, which is just college and pre-med cycle instead. So let's shift to the MCAT. So I need to talk about the MCAT because I feel like the word alone just makes people's stomach drop. Some people even think it's worse than step 1 or step 2. And they sometimes retake it and keep on taking it for years. So what should someone know about the MCAT, even if they're years away from taking it?
I would say understand that the test does not define you. It's not a symbol of whether or not you're going to be a good physician. It's not even a symbol of whether or not you'll survive med school. And it's very draining for so many reasons that are rather unnatural. It really makes them question the path. That's what I'll say is understand it's probably going to make you question whether or not this is for you. And if that's the only thing that makes you question it, I would say you can probably keep going and rest assured that this is just a phase because the MCAT definitely makes you question, like, is this for me? Because it's just so rough.
Right. So whenever you're talking about actually studying for the MCAT, there's also a money side of it as well because it's a big financial responsibility. So what resources are actually worth the money and for the MCAT and what's overhyped?
I would say the AAMC bundle for sure. Their questions because the test is made by the AAMC. So you definitely want theirs. Fortunately, that's one of the less expensive ones. Something that's also really good is the UWorld question bundles, just because their questions are pretty difficult. And so people tend to really jump up points and learn from them because of the difficulty. And then the ones that are slightly overhyped, I'm kind of on the fence, but the full MCAT courses where it's like $3,000.
Yeah.
Like Kaplan has one, Princeton has one. You don't have to do that if you can get access to like a set of books and also they don't need to be the newest year. They don't need to be the newest year. I mean, don't buy books that are like 10 years old, but like they don't have to be like 2027 books.
Are they
They
like,
can be
are the questions repeated in the MCAT or no?
No, the questions are not repeated, but in those like old books, like basically they just come out with new books every year, and that's kind of like a money grab. There are a lot of points in this process that are money grabs. So they come out with, a 2027 book, it's going to be so similar to the 2026 book. That's just like you're putting in the time and you're using the science-backed method of some Anki, some spaced repetition, and some practice questions. If you're doing that at an appropriate pace, you probably can get by without spending thousands of dollars.
Just like what you're saying, I feel like it's not only for the MCAT, but it's the same for every test. You have all the resources in front of you. It just depends on how consistent you stay, so you can spend less and less money. So when we're talking about gathering resources or tutors or books or anything like that, how far advanced should someone even start thinking about preparing for the MCAT or gathering those resources?
It's kind of like two parts. One, I think something I wish I would have done is downloaded the Anki decks, the Miles Down deck, and the Jack Sparrow deck. And for anybody listening, if you go in my bio, I have a Google Doc with all of those linked, and like, it's free and everything, and it describes what you can use them for. But those decks have the corresponding classes that you'd be taking, right? And so you can go in there and see what matches up with what you're learning in class. So what I wish I would have done is unsuspended those Anki cards as I was learning the material in class, because that would have only been like a few cards each day that I had class, which is not even every day. And it would have been a way lighter workload. And then when it came time for the MCAT, I would have just been doing my Anki cards all of that time. And so then my content review would have been done. And I would have never forgotten that stuff and had to like relearn it and review it and stuff like that.
So just like the content kind of disappearing from your mind if you're not using spaced repetition or active recall, what's one myth about the MCAT you would also wish that would just disappear out of students' heads?
One myth is that if you can't get like over a 500, that you're just not smart, that you just can't do it, that you're just like never going to make it. A lot of the MCAT is about strategy. So once you are start implementing these things we've talked about, like the spaced repetition, the practice questions, you're consistent putting in the hours day after day, you will eventually jump that hurdle and get there. But I think it's very discouraging for so many people because the MCAT has like 120 topics, and those topics are like big umbrella topics. So there's so many questions that can come out of all of those topics. And, it's so many subjects. Not everyone is great at every subject. So it's meant to be incredibly challenging, even for people who are the top of the top at their school. So I just think that pre-meds in general should be less judgmental of other people going through the experience because for everybody it's different. And for some people, if their struggle is not the MCAT, it could be step one, it could be step two. Like you just never know.
Right. And then we're very test centered right now. So let's zoom out a little bit past all the studying and the test and what is in an actual application and figuring out if it's even the right path for you. So, what makes a personal statement stand out in very plain terms?
I would say what makes a personal statement stand out is when somebody is really talking about themselves. They're centering themselves, their experiences, and their emotions in the personal statement while showing how that transformed them and has made them now ready to pursue medicine. A lot of people, they tend to incorporate stories that are about like a family member or like something happening to someone, and the story becomes centered around that person and
Mm.
not the applicant. So when you can really understand who the person is from the personal statement, from the experience, in a way that is described through what's going on rather than them just telling you, oh, I'm compassionate. If they give an example through the story where you can see that they're compassionate, that's what really makes them stand out.
Like, I've heard this is kind of gory, but I've heard this one college admissions officer say that if you're writing about someone passing away in your personal statement, it better be you because like it's not really talking about you, it's talking about them. And obviously the buildup is something that they see often because everyone experiences loss in their lives and they experience it in different ways and they grieve in different ways and they have very substantial, I guess you could say, experiences with it that help them grow as a person. But then again, once you zoom out, everyone is going through that. So whenever you're thinking about personal statements, I've heard that you need to make it very specific to you and the school you're talking about. What's one question every single applicant should be able to answer before applying anywhere?
I would say you should be able to answer why specifically medicine instead of PA, nursing, something like that, because a lot of schools will ask you that. And if you give an answer that is not specific to medicine, they'll just keep asking you why until you give them one. So that can definitely get pretty awkward if you're not prepared.
Okay, so now the next part is honestly probably the most important section for me personally, because I think we talk about this enough on the show or really anywhere in pre-med spaces. It's just about mental health and sustainability for not only pre-med students, but just students in general that are extremely ambitious. So what does a healthy competition look like versus a very toxic comparison culture into pre-med spaces online?
I would say healthy competition is you allow seeing somebody else's success to inspire you, and you don't do anything to try to take away from them or take them down or hinder what you see them getting. And you also don't just go after things other people have just because they have it. I think it's healthy if you see, okay, this person's really passionate about this and that led them to get this award. Well, then maybe that should inspire you to see, okay, what am I passionate about? And maybe you can go get something else. Or maybe if you're like younger than them, you can get the same award the next year. But I think online, it's a very toxic culture of like someone posts that they got an A in Orgo, and somebody's like, oh yeah, well, a lot of schools only care if you get an A+, something like that. Or like somebody posts like that they have a 503, and then somebody's like, yikes, like you should take another gap year or something like that. And so I think just not commenting on other people's metrics, like their MCAT, their GPA. I wouldn't comment on other people's. I also probably would not share your own just because people can, you don't know if everybody else is in that healthy
Yeah.
mindset like yourself. And if you share things with people that you're doing well, they will quickly start coming for you and trying to take things away from you and, building alliances with other people. And now, you can be getting iced out of leadership positions. Like word can spread very fast, especially if people feel like you are a threat. A lot of people at universities feel like there's only room for like one of like all these people to get into med school. So I would just say knowing when you're talking to people that anybody could have that mentality. And so just be very humble about what's going on for you.
Okay, so whenever you talk about mindset, this is very specific, but this is common amongst like any student. How should a student handle a bad grade or rejection without completely spiraling?
Mhm. Yeah, I do get this. I have spiraled many a times. I would say the best advice I've gotten is to use it as data. Use it as information. And as early as you guys can, it's really good because you guys are still early in your journey. Detach your identity from success. Like success is because I know all of you are high achieving, you're very smart, you're very with it, and you're already on it right now. And so when you get to a point where it's something where there's a very steep learning curve, whether that's the MCAT, whether that's orgo physics, any prerequisite classes, or even like med school itself, there's going to be a time where the learning curve is very steep and you don't, get an A plus plus like you're used to. And then you're going to be like having an existential crisis. So I feel like getting in the mindset as early as possible that your grades are data and it's just telling you whether or not what you're doing is working.
So, okay, that was all amazing. And I think that's very important for mental health. And obviously, we're going to listen to this and we're going to be like, okay, whatever. I'm still going to try hard and I'm still going to get disappointed over a bad grade. But there's obviously a bigger picture. So let's dive into the bigger picture. What keeps someone going during the parts of this path that aren't so glamorous? Like, what keeps them going through even like the late night study sessions or just feeling very upset with yourself or not reaching the goal you're supposed to?
I would say a few things. One thing that's really big for me is my network, like my support system. So my family, like I'm making sure to stay in touch with my family and friends. I mean, I call people multiple times a week. So one, that kind of helps keep me grounded. And it's also nice to hear about what people are doing outside of medicine too, because
Mhm.
sometimes we're always like in our own world, in our own head. And so that's always really refreshing. But then also thinking about future patients and like your dream or whatever you want to be doing
Mm.
with your career. So, your future patients deserve to have the version of you that pushes through,
Mhm.
that keeps going, or else they're never going to get to meet you.
And then I also feel like this enables some type of gratitude in you to think on how lucky you are to actually be like getting this education and start helping people. Because I know it's like something that most people say, but like actually being in the position of volunteering at a nursing home or being in a doctor's perspective, you realize how you're so grateful and how lucky you are. So kind of based on that, what's a non-negotiable skill or habit that almost every future doctor should start building like right now?
Mm, I would say to be unassuming of people, like to be very open and be very inquisitive with how you approach things. Making assumptions, it can hurt you in so many different ways. And so I feel like because so much of this career is connecting with people, right? So
Mm.
much of the career on the way, even into the door of med school involves talking to people, like in the interviews and getting to know people and all of the professors and the rec letters and the mentors and all of that before. It's really important. But then also, once you start getting around patients, when you're making assumptions about people, you're probably not giving them the best level of care that you could because you're missing information if you're not getting it from the source, if you're just filling in the blanks yourself.
Right. So, what's one thing on every like based on everything, lastly, I just want to end off with what's one thing you want every listener to walk away with from this episode on actually doing something differently?
Mm. On doing something differently, I would say get real with yourself as far as your studying and academics. I know I felt like in high school and just like at the earlier stages, it is easier to perform well while not putting in your max effort. But I would say just get into the habit of performing even better than you know you have to, just to prepare you for the next level. So start practicing getting familiar with active recall. Don't just do passive study methods because the stuff is easy for you and you already got it. Like practice and go through the motions of the actual ways that are science backed for you to learn and study, because you don't want to have to experience that steep learning curve later. And you also want to make sure you remember the information now, because it's going to be good building blocks for the pre-med courses you're taking in college.
And then this also kind of builds into some people have talent and some people don't have talent, but what really sticks is how hard you work and how much of yourself you put into whatever you're working. Based on everything we said, Amber, this was such a good conversation. And honestly, I think a lot of our listeners are going to be pulling their phones out mid-episode to go follow you. So before we wrap up, where can we find you and keep up with you and everything you're doing? So what are your handles?
Yes, my handle is at Med School Amber, and I'm on TikTok. That's my primary platform, but I'm also now expanding to Instagram, YouTube, and even Facebook. So you can find me at all of those places. I'm active on all of them now, but I have the most videos on TikTok. So if you want to even scroll back and see some, you can find me there at Med School Amber.
Okay, that's amazing. And I'll put that in the description below so everyone can go ahead and reach out. So we'll put that in the show notes. And for everyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in today. And if this episode helped you, go ahead and share it with a friend who needs to hear it. And as always, keep your finger on the pulse.